All right, so picture this. You're walking through a marsh in northern Europe, right?
Okay.
So it's like crisp air. You can smell that peat.
Yeah.
And suddenly, like right there, sticking out of the bog
Oh, no.
is a human hand. Creepy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's not a recent crime scene.
What?
It's a body, like remarkably well preserved, but from thousands of years ago.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So that's what we're diving into today. Bog bodies. You know, those naturally mummified human remains
Yeah.
that give us this, like, fascinating window to the past.
Yeah, it's incredible. You think about these bogs, right? They're like desolate, almost forbidding.
Yeah.
But they hold the key to like unlocking secrets from the Iron Age.
Especially in northern Europe.
Right.
And we're talking about a time way before written records, at least in this region.
Absolutely.
So these bog bodies, they become our storytellers.
Yes.
They give us this tangible link to the people who lived and died thousands of years ago.
And it's not just bones, right? It's skin, hair, clothing, even, stomach contents sometimes. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, speaking of that, some bog bodies have been found with perfectly styled hair, like even braids.
Yeah.
I mean, you really have to wonder, who were these people? Like, what were their lives like?
Yeah, that's what makes them so captivating, right? They challenge us to, like, rethink the past. They remind us that these were individuals. They had their own stories, skills, and social structures.
So before we get into all that, let's back up. What makes a bog, like, the perfect place to preserve a body?
Well, it's all about the chemistry. Lack of oxygen, that slows down decomposition. And then you've got sphagnum moss,
Yeah.
key ingredient in peat bogs, and it releases these compounds that basically tan the skin. And it gives the hair that kind of reddish hue.
Wow. It's amazing how nature can just create these, like, perfect mummification conditions.
I know.
Like the bogs were designed to preserve these bodies for us.
Yeah, it's kind of eerie when you think about it. And it's not just the moss, though. Even the bog oaks, the only trees that can survive in that environment, they contribute to that tanning process, too.
So it's like this perfect recipe.
Yeah, accidental mummification.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the bog is, like, collaborating with the whole process.
Right.
But, and here's where things get a little darker. A lot of these bog bodies, they didn't die naturally.
Right.
Signs of violence, like ritual sacrifice, maybe even murder.
And that's what raises the question, what were the beliefs, the social and religious beliefs that led to this?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what can these deaths tell us about their worldviews, about, like, their fears, their understanding of life and death?
So for our listeners out there, why should we even care about these people from thousands of years ago? What can their stories teach us?
Well, think of it this way. Studying them isn't just about, piecing together their individual lives. It's about understanding broader patterns of human behavior, like our relationship with the natural world. It's connecting with our shared history.
It's recognizing that, despite the time, they were just like us, living, breathing people with hopes, dreams, and fears.
Yeah, and sometimes they met with some pretty gruesome ends.
Yeah, exactly. So let's meet some of these people, shall we? I mean, each bog body has a story offering a piece of the puzzle that is our history.
Okay.
So let's start with the Elling woman.
All right.
Discovered in 1938 by a farmer in Denmark, she takes us back to 280 BCE,
Wow.
over 2,300 years ago.
That's incredible.
And she wasn't just a skeleton, right? She was found with clothing, a sheepskin cloak, a blanket made of cowhide, and even more cowhide wrapped around her lower body.
Yeah, it's a glimpse into the materials they used, for clothing and warmth.
And her hair was long, intricately braided, perfectly preserved by the bog.
It really shows you how amazing the preservation is.
But the Elling woman's story, well, it isn't all about fashion or hairstyles from the past.
No.
There's a darker side to it. Life in the Iron Age could be harsh.
Right.
Because she was found with a leather rope tied around her neck. It had a slip knot.
Oh, no.
And later analysis showed she had been hanged.
Wow.
Evidence points to a ritualistic sacrifice. And this theme, unfortunately, we're going to see it again.
Yeah.
With a lot of the bog bodies we'll be discussing today. So, from a woman who met a violent end, let's move on to one of the most famous bog bodies. The Toland man.
Okay.
Discovered in the same bog as the Elling woman, but going back even further to the 4th century BCE.
Wow.
The Toland man, he's often considered the, quintessential bog body.
Yeah.
Because his facial features are so well preserved, it's almost, unsettling.
Yeah, it's eerie.
Sleeping.
Yeah.
He was found in the fetal position, wearing a pointed cap, a leather noose around his neck, but with this really peaceful expression. And because of the bog,
Yeah.
right, scientists were able to analyze his stomach contents.
Wow.
They figured out his last meal was porridge and grains and even some fish bones.
It's amazing, right? We know what someone ate over 2,000 years ago.
I know. It's like bringing the past to life.
Yeah.
Textbooks just, can't do that.
No, it's a real reminder that these were people, not just entries in a history book. They lived, ate, interacted with their environment, just like we do.
So speaking of connecting with the past, our next bog body discovery takes us to the Netherlands, where in 1897, workers were digging in a peat bog, and, well, they stumbled upon the remains of the Eyed Girl.
Oh, wow.
And unlike the Tolan Man, who seemed to have a relatively peaceful end, the Eyed Girl's story, it's tragic.
Yeah.
Marked by violence and, well, mistreatment even after death.
That's awful.
Yeah. She was only 16 when she was killed.
Oh, my gosh.
And, well, it's disturbing, but after her discovery, villagers took some of her teeth, her hair, even bones, like souvenirs.
I can't believe that.
Yeah. It's a reminder that, while we've come a long way in recognizing the scientific and historical value of these remains, they weren't always treated with respect.
No.
But thankfully, technology has allowed us to learn more about her. Facial reconstruction. It's given us a glimpse of what she might have looked like.
That's amazing.
Kind of gives back some of that humanity that was, stolen from her.
Yeah, it's a powerful way to honor these individuals, to see them as people.
Yeah.
Not just, objects of curiosity. And sometimes, as we'll see with our next two bog bodies, their remains can offer us, like, a peek into their social hierarchy.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these next bog bodies.
Okay, so in 2003, in a bog in Ireland, there were two remarkable discoveries. The Cloney Man and Old Krogan Man.
Okay.
They were both found in the same bog, but died centuries apart.
Interesting.
Yeah. The Cloney Man, he was around like 392 to 175 BCE. And Old Krogan Man sometime between 362 and 175 BCE.
And what makes these discoveries so intriguing? You mentioned social hierarchy.
Yeah, well, they both met really violent ends, but their remains suggest they held a high social status.
Oh, that's interesting. So they weren't just average, farmers or laborers.
Right. For starters, they were both well-nourished, so, they had plenty to eat. But the real clincher is their grooming.
Yeah.
Manicured nails. And get this, evidence of imported hair gel in the Cloney Man's hair.
Wait, hair gel? Like what we use today?
Yeah. Analysis showed that it was a mix of plant resins and animal fats, probably imported from Gaul, which is modern-day France.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it suggests they had access to luxury goods, and they were likely part of a pretty sophisticated social network.
Like imagine finding an ancient iPhone in a bog.
Right.
Changes everything.
Yeah. But remember the contrast. These guys, manicured nails, fancy hair gel, they were brutally murdered. Cloney Man, his skull was smashed. Both show signs of torture. I mean, it wasn't a peaceful death at all.
So if they were wealthy,
Yeah.
well-connected, why the brutality? Who would want them dead and why?
Well, those are the million-dollar questions. And it leads us to a fascinating, somewhat controversial theory.
Okay.
Could these men have been failed kings?
The failed kings. Now that's interesting. Tell me more about this theory.
Well, there's this peculiar detail on both bodies. Their nipples were cut off.
Hold on. Nipple mutilation? What does that have to do with kingship?
Well, it seems like a weird connection, but there's some historical evidence that in ancient Ireland, sucking on a king's nipples was like a way to show submission, like, acknowledging his authority.
Okay, so by taking away his nipples, you take away his power. He's like unfit to rule.
Exactly. And we're talking about a time when kings weren't just political figures. They had this sacred connection to the land. They were responsible for the people, their well-being.
Yeah.
So a failed king, one who couldn't ensure, say, good harvests or protect his people.
Yeah.
Well, he might need to be replaced, possibly through ritual sacrifice.
So you're saying that these guys, Cloney Man, Old Krogan Man, manicured nails, imported hair gel, they could have been kings who, fell out of favor.
Yeah, it's a compelling theory. Adds a whole layer of, like, complexity to understanding power dynamics back then.
And ritual practices, too.
Exactly. It reminds us that the past wasn't always peaceful, and even powerful people could be victims of violence.
That's a great point. Speaking of violence in the past, let's switch gears a bit and talk about a case that involves a bog body mix-up
Okay.
and a real-life murder conviction. It shows how these, like, ancient remains can suddenly pop up in modern criminal investigations.
Oh, are you talking about the Lindo Man?
Yeah. Or, as the press called him, Pete Marsh.
Yeah, yeah.
Discovered in 1984 in England, he met a violent end, too. He was hit on the head, strangled, throat slit, and there's evidence he was forced to eat mistletoe.
And a broken leg, and he drowned in the bog, too. I mean, just brutal.
It's chilling to think it might not have just been random violence, but, a planned ritual killing.
Yeah, there's evidence that it was very precise. How his throat was cut, how the noose was tightened as he was bleeding out. It's like
Wow.
they were trying to maximize blood flow, maybe for some ritualistic reason.
That's both fascinating and disturbing, how something so gruesome could be connected to something
I
sacred.
know, it's definitely not how we see things today, but it shows how different their ideas were about morality and spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. But you mentioned a bog body mix-up.
Oh, yeah.
That case in Cheshire County, England,
Yeah.
back in '83.
Right?
It's a bizarre one. It started when two peat cutters found a skull. Super well preserved, as you'd expect from a bog body. They thought, okay, recent murder. Call the police.
Right.
And that led the police to reopen the case of Malika Maria de Fernandez. She disappeared in the 60s.
Yeah.
Her husband, Peter Rainbart, they always suspected him,
Right.
but they never had enough evidence to convict him.
Until the skull, right?
Exactly. They show him the skull, and boom, he confesses. Said he strangled her in a rage, dismembered her body, and dumped the pieces in the bog.
Oh, wow. It seemed like an open and shut case, right?
Right. They had their confession, the skull seemed to fit, but then, of course, came the dating analysis.
And
Turns out the skull wasn't from the 1960s, but from around 1700 years ago.
oh, no way.
It was a bog body, not a murder victim.
Oh, talk about embarrassing for the police.
I know. And poor Peter Rainbart confessing to a murder based on a, totally false premise.
So what happened?
Well, his confession, even though it was based on the wrong skull, was enough to get him a life sentence.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. And they never found her body, right? Malika Maria de Fernandez?
Nope, never found. It's a reminder that even with all the science, and the amazing things these bog bodies can tell us, some mysteries just stay unsolved.
Yes.
But before we wrap up our thoughts on the bog bodies, I want to talk about a few more individuals.
Okay.
The next one is the Groball Man. He was discovered in Denmark in 1952. He's known for, his amazing preservation, but also for the agony on his face.
Yeah. He's a chilling reminder of how brutal life and death could be back then. His throat was slashed so violently that his head was almost completely cut off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he had a broken leg, and there were signs of torture, too.
It's hard to even look at pictures of him. That grimace of pain, you can't help but feel for him.
Yeah. Even after all these centuries, you feel that human connection.
It's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes their stories show a more compassionate side of those ancient societies, Like the Huldremos one, discovered in Denmark in 1879. Her story, it's tragic, but it also shows, care and respect, even in death.
Okay.
The Huldremos woman, like so many others, she went through a horrific ordeal before she died. Her arm was cut off. She had a leather strap around her neck. There were other injuries, too.
Wow.
They believe she was drowned after being tortured.
Oh, my gosh.
It's heartbreaking to think about what she went through. But what gets me is that even with all that violence, she was dressed carefully, in many layers of clothing.
Oh.
It suggests that even in death, they treated her with care and respect.
It's a complicated picture, isn't it? This mix of brutality and ritual. It's hard to understand from our point of view.
Exactly. These aren't simple stories with easy answers. It's like looking into a past that's both familiar and strange at the same time.
And every new discovery, raises more questions than answers.
Yeah. Like, what were the exact beliefs and rituals behind these sacrifices? Were they always violent? Or could there have been some element of compassion? Maybe even consent?
Yeah.
It's like a puzzle where every bog body gives us a piece, but the full picture.
We just don't have it.
Right.
But that's the beauty of it, don't you think? It forces us to think about these mysteries of the past, about how complex human behavior is.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that history is always changing, right?
Right. It's constantly evolving. So for our listeners, what does this all mean for us today? What can we learn from these silent witnesses from the bog?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is to understand that the past is complex. These weren't primitive people living simple lives.
Right.
They were complex individuals dealing with a world that was just as challenging as ours.
Yeah.
And their remains, they show us their ingenuity, their resourcefulness, their beliefs, even their capacity for both violence and compassion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a reminder that history is made up of so many individual stories.
It's also a reminder of our own mortality, isn't it?
Yeah.
These were real people, just
Yeah.
like us, and now they're just, these haunting figures preserved in the peat.
Makes you think about our own place in the world, doesn't it?
Yeah. And maybe most importantly, it shows us how important research and science are. That's how we keep learning more about these people, their lives, their deaths, their societies.
And every new discovery could change everything we thought we knew. It challenges our assumptions and makes us appreciate history even more.
Perfectly said. And on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye to our listeners and to these captivating individuals from the bog.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery. Remember, there's always more to learn, more to question, and more to explore. The past is never truly gone, right?
Right. It lives on in the stories we tell and the things we learn from them.
Exactly.
And if you're interested in learning more about bog bodies, we've included some great resources in the show notes.
Yes. And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more exciting explorations of history, science, and everything in between.
Until next time, keep exploring. It's amazing to think about these desolate bogs holding like these historical treasures, but it's not just the bodies, is it?
Right. It's what they tell us, about their societies, their beliefs, their practices, like how they understood the world.
Yeah, and it strikes me that while we often focus on the, violence and the rituals, there's also evidence of their, like, ingenuity and adaptation.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the tools and clothes we've found. The weaving, using natural resources for like shoes, weapons. It shows how resourceful they were, how they understood their environment.
Yeah, it reminds us that they weren't just victims. They shaped their world, they adapted.
Yeah, exactly. And that ingenuity extends to their relationship with the bogs, too. It wasn't just a place of death, right?
Yeah.
It was a source of fuel, food, materials. It was a part of their ecosystem.
It makes you wonder if they saw bogs as sacred, like places of both life and death, where the physical and spiritual worlds, kind of blurred.
That's a great question, and it's one that, archaeologists and anthropologists are still thinking about. There's more and more evidence suggesting that bogs might have been really important to them, like gateways to the afterlife or places to communicate with the gods.
That adds a whole other layer to these discoveries. And with each new find, each new analysis, we learn more. Who knows what secrets they'll reveal in the future, right?
That's what's so great about history, right? It's this journey of discovery, and the past keep teaching us new things about the present.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, what are some key takeaways from our deep dive into bog bodies?
I think the biggest one is to remember that the past is complex. These weren't just, simple people living simple lives.
Right.
They were complex, dealing with a world that was just as challenging as ours is.
And their remains, they show us that, their ingenuity, their resourcefulness, their beliefs, even their capacity for violence and compassion. It's a reminder that history is made up of all these individual stories.
And it's a reminder that our understanding of history is always changing. As we make new discoveries, as technology advances, the bog bodies show us that. They're a testament to how the past can still teach us so much.
Beautifully said. And I think it's time to say goodbye to our listeners and to these incredible people from the bog.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, there's always something new to learn, something new to question, and something new to explore. The past isn't really gone,
Right. It lives on in the stories we tell, the things we learn from them.
Exactly.
If you're interested in learning more about bog bodies, check out the links we've got in the show notes.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of history, science, and everything in between.
Until next time, keep exploring.